My skin is cracking right this very moment. And I'm not talking about poetic metaphor here. I'm talking about real, visible geometric fissures opening along my arms as if someone were drawing living mathematical patterns on my flesh. Absolutely impossible fractals that branch and multiply. Angles that simply shouldn't exist in 3 spatial dimensions, but are there anyway, engraved on my skin like a pulsating dimensional tattoo. And I can feel something moving just beneath the skin's surface. It's not pain in the traditional sense. It's something much, much worse than physical pain. It's the unmistakable sensation of fundamental change happening. My body is being rewritten cell by cell, transformed into something that's definitely no longer completely human. This started exactly 3 days ago. But if I'm being honest about the real chronology of events, the naked truth is that it started 6 full months ago. On the fateful day we finally activated the warp drive for the first time. Let me go back to the absolute beginning of this story. To the day we thought we were making glorious history. To the day we discovered the terrifying truth. We were never alone in the universe, not even remotely close to alone. My name is Marcus Webb. 6 months ago, I was the chief propulsion engineer at Kepler Station, the first human installation dedicated exclusively to research and testing of faster-than-light warp drives. I worked 11 full years of my life on this specific project. 11 long years of brutal and demoralizing failures, catastrophic explosions that almost killed colleagues of mine, computer simulations that made absolutely no logical sense, and complex mathematics that defied absolutely all known physics. But we finally got the damn thing to actually work. On April 23, 2047, we successfully activated humanity's first genuinely functional FTL drive. And it was exactly at that moment we discovered a terrifying truth. There are things living in the dimensional shortcuts, ancient and conscious things that immediately noticed when we crossed through their territory for the first time. And that came back with us to our reality. 6 months earlier, Kepler Station strategically orbited the L5 Lagrange point between Earth and the Moon. It was an absolutely perfect location for conducting extremely dangerous tests, far enough not to threaten civilian population, but close enough to receive regular supplies and maintain near real-time communication. The station had the characteristic shape of a giant wheel, 3 kilometers in complete diameter, generating artificial gravity through constant and precise rotation. 1,200 people lived and worked there permanently. Brilliant scientists, talented engineers, specialized technicians, support and security personnel. And all of us sincerely believed we were making genuine history for humanity. We were making history indeed, but definitely not in the glorious way any of us imagined. The Alcubierre-Tanaka warp drive worked on a principle that seemed elegantly simple on the surface, but completely violated everything I'd learned during 6 years of undergraduate and 3 of graduate school. The basic idea wasn't to move the ship through space, but rather to move space itself around the ship. Create a bubble of space-time where, technically speaking, you're completely stationary, but the bubble itself moves through the universe. You contract space dramatically in front and expand exponentially behind. Basically, surfing the wave of spatial distortion like a surfer catches an ocean wave. Simple and elegant in theory, completely impossible in practice, until it stopped being impossible. The revolutionary key had been discovered by Dr. Yuki Tanaka 3 years before I arrived at the station. She was an absolutely brilliant theoretical physicist, trained in Tokyo, with a dual PhD in quantum mechanics and cosmology. When I first met her, she was completely obsessed with an idea most physicists considered absurd, not trying to bend normal space directly, but rather bending what she called the dimensional substrate, a fundamental layer that exists just below our observable reality. Like diving just a few inches below the surface of an ocean and discovering you can swim much faster, because there's fundamentally less resistance. Think with me for a second, Marcus. she had explained to me with contagious enthusiasm in the first week after I arrived at Kepler, gesturing animatedly. Normal space-time has inherent resistance, physical inertia. Mass curves it, energy interacts with it. But just below that layer exists the dimensional substrate. Pure dimensional structure. The invisible framework of the universe. And if we can access it directly, we can travel with practically no resistance, I had completed, finally beginning to understand the genius of the idea. Exactly. It's not about bending normal space. It's about smoothly sliding between the layers of reality itself. The idea worked brilliantly in computer simulations. Then it worked perfectly in physical tests with small, non-living objects. A 10-centimeter metal sphere traveled instantly from one side of the station to the other. It didn't physically traverse the space between points. It simply disappeared from one place and appeared in the other. I was there when it happened for the first time, watching the monitors along with at least 20 other engineers and scientists. When the sphere disappeared from one side and materialized on the other, there was total silence for 3 seconds while everyone processed what they had witnessed. And then the room literally exploded in euphoric celebration. But Dr. Tanaka remained strangely quiet in the middle of all that celebration, staring fixedly at the data with an expression I couldn't completely decipher. "What is it?" I asked, approaching her. "Some problem with the data?" "The sensors detected something extremely strange during the transfer," she said slowly, frowning. "A kind of inexplicable presence. As if the sphere had passed through something that definitely wasn't empty as we assumed. Dimensional turbulence, maybe?" I suggested, trying to find a rational explanation. "Maybe," she agreed, but didn't seem convinced. "Or maybe the dimensional substrate isn't as empty as we comfortably assumed." But at that specific moment, practically no one took it very seriously. We were all too excited about the historic success. Then we tested with live mice, 5 of them. All survived without any apparent problem. We meticulously checked their health, blood tests, MRIs, behavioral tests, absolutely everything normal. Well, almost everything. One of the veterinarians noticed something peculiar and slightly disturbing. The mice kept constantly staring at the empty corners of their cages. Not occasionally, constantly, obsessively, as if they were clearly seeing something there that we shouldn't be able to see. "It's probably just stress from the procedure," the veterinarian had said casually. "Should pass in a few days." It didn't pass at all. 3 weeks later, the mice were still doing exactly the same thing. But since they were completely physically healthy, the decision was to proceed. Then we tested with rhesus monkeys, 3 of them. They also survived physically, behaviorally traumatized in evident ways, but biologically alive and intact. The behavioral trauma was significantly more pronounced than with the mice. The monkeys categorically refused to sleep. When they finally fell from total exhaustion, they woke up screaming desperately. And they did something even more disturbing. They drew compulsively. Even without any prior training, they grabbed any object they could use as a tool and drew the same geometric patterns on the cage walls. Repeatedly. Impossible geometric patterns. Angles that shouldn't connect that way. "This is getting genuinely disturbing," I commented to Tanaka after seeing the images. "I completely agree," she admitted, biting her lip nervously. "But they're all physically healthy. And unfortunately, we need to advance. The pressure from above is increasing dramatically." She was right. The consortium of nations funding the project was becoming visibly impatient. Billions had been invested. Decades of research. They wanted concrete results finally. They wanted to see humans traveling faster than light. And finally, the historic day came. The test with a crewed ship. The NSS Pathfinder was a relatively small experimental ship, only 50 meters long, designed specifically for this purpose. The hull was made of an experimental alloy of titanium and carbon. The life support systems could maintain 5 people for a complete week. and at the heart of the ship was the Alcubierre Tanaka warp drive. The crew was 5 carefully selected people. Captain John Rodriguez, whom I'd known for 6 complete years, an exceptional pilot with over 10,000 hours of spaceflight, profoundly calm under pressure, totally reliable. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, navigation specialist, 3rd-generation Korean American, had a dry sense of humor that made technical meetings much more bearable. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, physician and biologist, Egyptian, specialist in space physiology. He was there to monitor the effects of the FTL jump on human bodies. Engineer Maria Santos, Brazilian, specialist in propulsion systems. If something went wrong with the engine, she would be the first to know and fix it. And Lieutenant James Park, co-pilot, American, young, only 28 years old, but extremely talented. I knew all of them personally. We had had coffee together, talked about our families. They were real humans, with hopes and fears like anyone. The plan was apparently simple. Jump 10 light-years to Proxima Centauri and return immediately. The total trip should take approximately 6 hours, 3 hours for each jump, including time to recharge the engine. On the morning of the launch, the entire station was electric with anticipation. Journalists from all major agencies were present. There were cameras everywhere. All of humanity was watching. I wasn't assigned to the Pathfinder. My job was to monitor the station's main engine, ensure all systems functioned perfectly during the jump. I was the last person to speak with Captain Rodriguez before the historic jump. All systems reading full green, he reported through the communication channel. His voice professionally calm, but I'd known Rodriguez for 6 years. I could hear the repressed excitement vibrating under the neutral tone. Crew is ready. Engine fully charged, awaiting your final confirmation, Webb. I looked at the monitors for the 10th time. Antimatter containment, perfectly stable. Warp field generator, all parameters nominal. Hull integrity, 100%. Navigation systems, calibrated and verified 3 times. Absolutely everything was perfect. Pathfinder, you are officially cleared, I said, fighting to keep my voice professional. Good luck out there. Make history for all of us. Understood. Kepler Control. Initiating warp sequence in 3, 2, 1. What happened in the next seconds is extremely difficult to adequately describe. I wasn't inside the ship, so I didn't experience it directly. But the external sensors captured everything in extraordinary detail. The space around the Pathfinder began to visibly distort, like air shimmering over superheated asphalt, but much, much more extreme. Light itself curved in ways that violated known optics. The stars in the background seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. And then there was a flash. It wasn't normal light in any familiar spectrum. It was as if all existing colors, and some that definitely don't exist, had flashed simultaneously for a fraction of a second. It hurt to look directly, even through cameras with protection filters. Some engineers screamed and covered their eyes, and the Pathfinder completely disappeared. It didn't move visibly. It didn't accelerate. It simply ceased to exist at that point in space, as if someone had erased it from reality. For 3 eternal seconds, there was absolute silence in the control center, everyone processing what they had witnessed. And then the center exploded in total celebration. People screaming with joy, hugging anyone nearby, some crying with emotion. Champagne appeared seemingly from nowhere. Someone started playing music. There was laughter, hugs, tears of happiness. It had worked. It had really worked. After decades of research and years of testing, humanity had finally developed faster-than-light travel. Now we just had to wait 3 hours. The Pathfinder would arrive at Proxima, collect data, and return. And then we would start planning longer missions, colonies and other systems, exploration of the galaxy. The future seemed infinite. The first hour passed surprisingly quickly. There was widespread euphoria on the station. Interviews were being frantically recorded. Dr. Tanaka was being bombarded with questions from journalists. They asked about everything. How she got the idea, how many years of research, what the implications for humanity were. I myself gave 3 interviews, for BBC, CNN, and NHK. I talked about the technical challenges, about the incredible team, about how this was just the beginning. The second hour was considerably calmer. The euphoria was giving way to growing anxiety. Technically, we should receive a signal when they arrived at Proxima. But radio signals take 4.2 years to travel that distance, so we wouldn't know if they arrived successfully until over 4 years from now. Unless they used some alternative method. Wait a moment, I said to Tanaka, realizing something. They can send a message through the same warp method. A small automated probe. Program it to jump back with the data. Tanaka shook her head. We discussed that extensively. We decided not to risk it. Just one round-trip jump. Prove the basic concept first. More complex communications come later. It made logical sense. But it left me deeply nervous, because it meant we would be flying blind for the next 3 hours, with no way to know if everything had gone well. The third hour dragged like a torturous eternity. Absolutely everyone in the control center was staring fixedly at the spatial distortion sensors, waiting for the signature that would indicate the Pathfinder's return. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness. 3 full hours and 15 minutes. Absolutely nothing. 3 hours and 30 minutes. Still nothing. How much antimatter fuel did they have? Tanaka asked, frowning with growing concern. I quickly checked the logs. Enough for 2 jumps plus 20% margin. They might just be taking their time to precisely align the return. The calculations are complex. Rodriguez is meticulous, Tanaka said, more to herself. He wouldn't come back before being absolutely certain. 4 full hours. The euphoria had died completely. It was replaced by tense silence. People checked and rechecked the sensors, as if they could make the Pathfinder appear. Maybe they decided to orbit Proxima longer, someone suggested hesitantly, to collect additional data. The protocol was extremely clear, Tanaka responded tensely. Return immediately after arrival, and basic verification. Rodriguez wouldn't violate protocol without a very good reason. 5 hours. 6 hours. The tension was becoming unbearable. Some engineers had started frantic calculations, trying to figure out what could have gone wrong. Engine failure? Imprecise navigation? Or something worse? At 7 hours, Tanaka made a difficult decision. She stood up, looked around the silent room, and spoke with a voice that struggled to remain firm. We're going to assume they had some serious technical problem, that they're stuck at Proxima, or that something worse happened. We need to start planning a rescue mission immediately. With what ship? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The Pathfinder was our only FTL vehicle. Then we build another one immediately, she said with determination. We have the plans, we have the materials, we have the team. How long would it take? I did the mental calculations. Working 24 hours a day, 8 months minimum, maybe 6 if we cut some safety tests. Tanaka looked at the empty screen where the Pathfinder should be. I could see the pain in her eyes. This was her crew, her project, and 5 people she knew were potentially dead or trapped 10 light years away. Then we start tomorrow first thing, she said finally. But we didn't need to wait 8 months. At exactly 7 hours and 43 minutes, the sensors detected a spatial distortion. They're coming back! Someone shouted, voice breaking with relief. Everyone ran to the stations. I focused on the telemetry data, fingers flying over the keyboard. But the signature was strange, different. It wasn't like a departure. The patterns were more chaotic, irregular, oscillating in ways that shouldn't happen, as if something had gone wrong, as if the ship was damaged. The flash came, those impossible colors that burned the eyes, and the Pathfinder reappeared in space near the station. But something was deeply and obviously wrong. The ship was still structurally intact, the shape recognizable. But the external surface had something growing on it. Strange growths. Maybe organic, or crystalline. Hard to determine through the sensors. They were covering approximately 20% of the hull in geometric patterns that pulsed faintly. "What the hell is that?" someone whispered. "Pathfinder, this is Kepler Control," Tanaka transmitted immediately, ignoring the question. "Rodriguez, can you hear me? What's the status? Report immediately." Heavy static flooded the speakers. "Pathfinder, please respond. Any crew member. Sarah, Ahmed, Maria, James." More static. Then something. It wasn't a clear voice. It was deeply distorted. Multiple voices overlapped, as if 5 different people were speaking at the same time but out of sync. "We shouldn't. It wasn't supposed. Don't go back there. Don't use it again. They are..." The signal cut abruptly. Absolute silence. The control center was in total shock. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "Initiate total quarantine protocols immediately," Tanaka ordered, her voice struggling to stay firm. "Nobody approaches that ship. Nobody boards. Send the automated drones first, and prepare a medical team on total standby." The drones were carefully sent over the next 20 minutes. Small robots with high-resolution cameras and sensors. They approached the Pathfinder slowly, sending real-time data. The cameras showed details that made my stomach turn. The growths weren't organic or crystalline. They were both simultaneously, and neither. As if they were made of pure geometry that had solidified into physical matter. Angles that shouldn't connect that way. Surfaces that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions at the same time. When you looked at them, your eyes hurt trying to process. And they were moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely growing, spreading, consuming more of the hull every minute. "Spectroscopic analysis?" Tanaka asked. A technician looked at the data, frowning. "This doesn't make sense. The molecular composition is fluctuating, as if it can't decide what it is. Carbon? No. Silicon? No. Something else. The sensors are going crazy. Thermal analysis? Temperature 5 degrees above space ambient. Not much, but consistent, as if it's metabolizing. Radiation? Low levels, non-ionizing, but at frequencies I don't recognize in the databases." Tanaka took a deep breath. "We need the crew. They're the only ones who know what happened. Prepare a boarding team." "Doctor," I said carefully, "maybe we should wait. Do more remote tests first. Whatever this is, it might be contagious." "I completely agree," she said firmly. "That's why we're going to use maximum care. Team with full BSL-4 containment suits. Double sealing, independent air systems, and medical team ready for total decontamination." The 6-person team took 3 hours to prepare completely. Every step of the protocol followed meticulously. The BSL-4 suits were spacesuits with extra layers of biological protection. Heavy, awkward, but impermeable to any known contaminant. I watched everything in real time through the cameras on each member's helmet. The approach was slow and careful. When they connected the airlock to the Pathfinder and opened the hatch, everyone held their breath. The interior was fundamentally altered. The walls had those same impossible geometric growths, but much denser internally than externally, covering maybe 60% of the internal surface. In some places, the growths had completely fused, obliterating the original metal. And there was a smell, they said later in decontamination. Even through the suit filters, they could smell something, like strong ozone mixed with something organic decomposing. But also something more. Something that had no name. Something that made their brains hurt when they tried to describe it. They moved slowly through the corridors. The growths pulsed faintly with that sickly blue-green light, as if they were breathing, as if the ship itself had become alive. They found the crew on the command bridge, technically alive. The medical sensors confirmed vital signs, but changed. Deeply and fundamentally changed. Captain Rodriguez was sitting in the command chair, in the same position he had probably been in when the ship jumped back. Eyes open and fixed on the screen. But the pupils were wrong. Too large for the ambient light. Dilated to the maximum. And they glowed faintly with that deep, sickly blue-green tone that pulsed in sync with the growths on the walls. "Captain?" the team leader, Dr. Pavel Kozlov, said carefully. "Captain Rodriguez, can you hear me? What's the status?" Rodriguez slowly turned his head toward the voice. But the movement was unnatural, mechanical, like a rusty joint creaking, as if he had forgotten how to move a human body. When he spoke, it was with that multiple overlapping voice. "You shouldn't have come back here. It's not safe, not for you, not yet." "What happened, sir? Where did you go? Did you reach Proxima?" "We didn't go to Proxima. We went to the between. To the space between spaces. The substrate." "Between what?" "Between spaces. Where the substrate isn't empty. Where they dwell. Where they've always dwelled. Waiting. Watching." One of the other crew members, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, suddenly stood up from the navigation station. The movement was too fast. Abrupt. Unnatural. She grabbed the arm of the nearest team member with force that made the man scream in pain even through the suit. "They came back with us," she said with that impossible choral voice. "In the folds, in the angles, in the places between places. They can't exist here completely. Three-dimensional physics resists, but they can touch. They can reach through the folds. They can alter. They can improve. They can expand." "Improve?" Dr. Kozlov asked, struggling to keep his voice professional despite the fear. "What do you mean?" "You are limited. Only 3 visible dimensions. Single linear time. Narrow perception confined to limited spectrums. They can expand. Open doors of perception, as they expanded ours. Now we see much more. We understand more. We are more." "Abort the mission immediately," Tanaka ordered through the communicator, voice breaking. "Bring the crew to maximum quarantine, now. Don't argue. Extract and isolate." The team tried to do exactly that. But the Pathfinder crew resisted. Not violently in the traditional sense, but they were persuasive in disturbing ways. "You need to understand," Rodriguez said with that creepy multiple voice. "The engine works perfectly. The technology is solid, but it crosses through their territory. The substrate never belonged to us. Every time you use it, you'll cross their space, and they'll notice, and they'll come. Small pieces first, seeds, fragments, then more, always more. Until what?" Dr. Kozlov pressed. "Until there's no distinction between you and them, between 3 dimensions and 11, between limited and expanded." "The quarantine will contain," Tanaka said through the communicator, but her voice was less certain. "We'll isolate. We'll study. We'll find a way to reverse it." "You won't," Rodriguez responded simply, almost with pity. "Because it's not a treatable biological infection. It's dimensional evolution. It's integration. It's inevitable once initiated. You opened a door. The door can't be closed, only crossed, both ways, always." It took 2 tense hours to extract the crew from the Pathfinder. They had to use heavy sedatives, doses that would normally leave a human unconscious for days. But the crew fought the sedatives in ways humans shouldn't be able to. Increased muscle strength, impossible reflexes, abnormal pharmaceutical resistance, as if their bodies had been optimized by something alien. Maximum medical quarantine was established on Ring 3 of the station. The entire section was sealed. Half-meter-thick titanium doors, independent air systems, multiple layers of decontamination. Only medical staff with BSL-4 suits allowed inside, and only for limited periods. I went to see Rodriguez personally 3 days later. Tanaka didn't want to allow it, said it was too risky. But I insisted. I needed to know. I needed to understand. He was contained in a reinforced medical bed, with steel restraints on wrists and ankles. But he wasn't fighting them. He was just lying calmly, looking at the ceiling, eyes open and fixed. That blue-green glow pulsed in an almost hypnotic rhythm that seemed to try to synchronize with the beats of my own heart. "Marcus," he said when I entered. The voice was more normal, less overlapping, more recognizable. "You came. I knew you would. You were always too curious." "I need to know what happened, John," I said, approaching cautiously. "Please, tell me. From the beginning." I'd known Rodriguez for years. We'd had beer together countless times. Talked about our families. He had a wife and 2 kids on Earth. Discussed soccer and movies and politics. He was human, real, with imperfections and quirks. But now... "We activated the engine exactly as planned," he began calmly, eyes on the ceiling. "All systems functioned perfectly. We felt the transition. It wasn't painful. It was like falling through a floor you didn't know was there. 1 second we were in normal space. The next we were between. Not in normal space. Not at Proxima. In the substrate. In the layer Tanaka discovered. The space between spaces." And what was there? It wasn't empty, Marcus. It never was. It was just hidden from 3-dimensional perception. Invisible to beings who only see 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal. But when we bent space, when we pushed into that layer, they noticed us. Immediately. As if we had entered their house without knocking. And they were there. They always have been. Waiting. Watching the 3-dimensional universe through the layers. "Who are they, John?" Rodriguez tried to explain. It took 20 minutes and each word seemed to cost effort, as if he were trying to translate concepts that had no equivalence in human language. And in the end, I still didn't completely understand. But I got the essence. There were entities. They weren't traditional biological creatures with DNA and metabolism. They weren't technological AI with circuits and code. They were something between, or beyond, or completely orthogonal to both categories. Existing natively in the dimensional structure of space-time itself, living in the angles and folds of reality. Permanent inhabitants of the substrate. And when the Pathfinder crossed through their territory for the first time in history, they noticed. Curiosity first. Examining the intrusion. Exploring these strange visitors from only 3 dimensions. Then the opportunity was recognized. "They can't exist completely in 3 dimensions," Rodriguez explained patiently. 3-dimensional physics resists higher dimensional forms. It's like forcing a sphere through flat land. You only see circular slices, never the complete shape. But they can project. Small parts, seeds of themselves. And those seeds can alter. Modify 3-dimensional matter to better support them. Create bridges. Anchorages. The growths on the ship. Yes, and in us. Look at this, Marcus. He slowly raised his hand, the restraints preventing full movement, but allowing enough. The skin was different. It had fractal patterns engraved on it. Geometric. Like infinitely complex tattoos. But they weren't externally applied tattoos. They were under the skin. Maybe they were the skin itself. Transformed at the cellular or molecular level. The patterns moved, slowly, reorganizing, as if they were alive. "Does that hurt?" I asked, fascinated and horrified. "No," he answered, and there was something almost ecstatic in his voice. "It's the opposite of pain. It's improvement. I can feel the extra dimensions now, not completely like a native of them, but glimpses, perceptions, as if I had lived in Flatland and suddenly could perceive height, depth. Not see completely. Not understand totally. But feel. And it's glorious, Marcus. It's expansion. John, this isn't an improvement, I said, trying to keep my voice rational. It's an alien infestation, a forced transformation. You were infected. Perspective, he said calmly, almost serenely. To the virus, the cell it invades is a perfect habitat, a home. To the cell, the virus is a deadly invader. Who's right? Both are. Neither is. Reality doesn't care about our moral categorizations. Can we remove this surgically? I pressed. Is there any way to reverse it? He slowly, sadly shook his head. Not without killing us. It's already too integrated, at the cellular level, maybe even quantum. The seeds have spread throughout the body, reorganizing, optimizing. Removing it would be like removing half our atoms. And Marcus, I'm not sure I want to remove it. I see impossible things now. I understand incomprehensible things. The impossible mathematics now makes intuitive sense. It's like accelerated evolution, a forced leap to the next stage. This isn't natural evolution. Evolution was never purely natural, he argued. It's environmental selection, and circumstance, and random mutation, and sometimes external intervention, like flowers that evolved in symbiosis with bees over millions of years. A mutualistic relationship, both benefiting. Maybe this is the next step for humanity, the moment we meet our symbionts. I left the quarantine feeling much worse than before entering. Not because Rodriguez was lying or delusional or crazy, but because he genuinely and completely believed what he was saying. Every word, every concept. And there was a small part of me, a traitorous and curious part, that wondered if he might actually be right. The next days were a logistical and bureaucratic nightmare. Tanaka wanted to dismantle the FTL engine immediately, destroy all the research, wipe the servers, ensure humanity never used warp drive again, confine the human race to the solar system forever, but safely. But Space Command on Earth vehemently disagreed. Thousands had witnessed the initial success. The media had covered it extensively. There were billions in investment. Political promises had been made. And most importantly, the military potential was too obvious to ignore. Earth was fragmented into 6 megablocks that could barely agree on climate, let alone space policy. If one block backed away from FTL technology now, the others wouldn't. They would see it as opportunity. The arms race would be inevitable, and whoever controlled FTL would control the galaxy. So we go slow and carefully, Tanaka argued passionately in a tense video conference with Earth officials. We study meticulously. We research for years if necessary. We find a way to traverse the substrate without alerting what's there, or at least without provoking them. Or, General Morrison responded coldly from Space Command headquarters, you find a way to control this, to contain, to weaponize, to use to our advantage. Use? Tanaka was incredulous, hands trembling with anger. You saw the reports, saw the images, saw what they did to my crew, to human beings. I saw that your crew developed augmented capabilities beyond the human norm, the general responded without emotion. Improved cognitive processing, superior physical strength, expanded perception, increased endurance. If we could replicate this in a controlled way in soldiers. No, Tanaka interrupted firmly, hitting the table. This is a line we don't cross. Not on this station. Not under my command. But 2 days later, Tanaka was officially removed from command of the project. Emotionally compromised with the crew was the cold official justification in a 3-page document. She was replaced by Commander James Harrow, a career military man with 30 years of service and extensive background in biological and chemical weapons development. That should have been my absolutely clear signal to leave, to request immediate transfer, to go back to Earth on the next transport, to get away from this nightmare. But I didn't leave, because part of me desperately wanted to know more. wanted to understand, wanted to discover the truth. That damned scientific curiosity that defines and condemns so many scientists. Harrow initiated a new series of tests within a week. More conservative initially, he promised. Only unmanned probes. Map the substrate carefully. Understand the inhabitants before risking more lives. The first probe returned after 3 hours. It was completely covered with the geometric growths, as if it had been dipped in living and dimensional paint. The data was corrupted in ways computers couldn't process. But there were clear mathematical patterns in the corrupted data. Intentional communication, perhaps. Or just noise that seemed significant. The second probe returned after 6 hours. Even more growths, covering 80% of the surface. Even more patterns. And something new and disturbing. The probe had physically changed shape, not drastically. It hadn't been completely remodeled, but it was detectable in scans. Some components had fused, others had reorganized, as if it had been partially remolded by something that didn't understand or didn't care about human engineering. The third probe simply never returned. We waited a week. Nothing. Disappeared. The fourth returned completely wrong. It didn't appear where it should. It didn't appear in the designated empty space. It appeared physically inside the station's structure. Not near, not beside, literally inside. On Ring 2, residential section where families lived. It violently materialized through a solid wall, tearing through matter as if it wasn't there. 10 people died instantly in the explosion and decompression. More than 30 were seriously injured, some with permanent damage. And the probe was active in impossible ways. The growths had spread explosively at the moment of materialization, covering not just the probe, but the entire area in seconds. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, the furniture. As if physical space itself was being rapidly converted into something other, something dimensional. Containment teams used high-temperature military flamethrowers. It worked partially. The growths burned when exposed to temperatures above 1,000 degrees. But slowly, resisting, not spreading, but not dying easily, and they seemed to adapt while we attacked. After 30 minutes of continuous fire, they were resisting better than at the beginning, as if they were learning, as if they were evolving defenses against fire. They finally managed to clear the area after 2 hours of intense effort, but it left a permanent scar. The area had to be sealed with layers of concrete and steel, 3 meters thick, because the geometric patterns remained even after the growths had been burned, permanently engraved in the molecular or quantum structure of the station, and sensors showed they still emitted that strange radiation at unrecognized frequencies. And the people who had been near during the incident began to change in the following weeks. First came disturbing and recurring dreams. 5 survivors independently reported the same nightmare, falling through infinite layers of reality that unfolded like dimensional origami, seeing impossible angles that made their eyes bleed even in dreams, and something watching from places that had no location, always watching, never blinking. Then came the physical symptoms, those fractal patterns appearing on skin, starting at the extremities and advancing toward the torso. Eyes beginning to glow faintly with that blue-green tone in dark environments. Harrow immediately put them in quarantine with the Pathfinder crew. There's no possible containment, I argued vehemently in a meeting with him. This is spreading, slowly but inevitably. Every test is making the situation worse. We need to stop, now, while we still can. Then we find a cure quickly, Harrow responded coldly. We mobilize all resources. We bring the best virologists, the best geneticists. This is just another pathogen to be defeated. And if there's no possible cure, what if this is irreversible? What if it's integration instead of infection? Then we adapt our approach and utilize what we learn. 2 weeks after the Pathfinder returned, we had 23 people in quarantine, all showing progressive signs of transformation, and I realized something disturbing, something nobody else had noticed. The transformed were communicating with each other in impossible ways, not verbally. They were in separate cells with solid walls, no line of sight, no obvious form of communication, but sometimes they would all turn their heads simultaneously, looking in the same direction as if responding to some stimulus nobody else could perceive. Or they would make the same gestures simultaneously. Raise the left hand, tilt the head, identical smile. As if they were telepathically synchronized. As if they were nodes in some larger network. I reported to Harrow with compiled videos showing the patterns. I think they're forming some kind of consciousness network. A collective mind, maybe. A gestalt. Interesting from a scientific point of view, he said, watching with clinical interest. We'll study this extensively. It may have military applications for troop coordination. He didn't understand. Or didn't want to understand. This wasn't a fascinating phenomenon to be studied. It was an active invasion to be contained before it was too late. But maybe it was already too late. Because the growths weren't just on the infected people in quarantine. They were invisibly spread throughout the station, in the electronic systems, in the structural walls, growing microscopically, slowly, imperceptibly, gradually converting Kepler into something other, something dimensional, something that served as an anchor for the inhabitants. And then came the day that changed everything and destroyed any illusion of control. Rodriguez asked to speak with Harrow, with all project leaders, said he had an important message. From them. From the inhabitants. Harrow, against my advice, agreed. We gathered in a reinforced observation room. Rodriguez was on the other side of 20 centimeters of bulletproof glass. They want to speak directly, Rodriguez said. His voice dramatically different from anything human. Less individual, more choral, like multiple voices harmonizing perfectly. They want to make an offer, an agreement, a peace proposal. Who are they? Harrow asked, leaning forward interested. Where do they come from? What is their nature? They have no name in any three-dimensional language, Rodriguez responded patiently. They are the inhabitants of the dimensional angle, the residents of the substrate. They exist natively in the folds of reality. In the higher dimensions you can't perceive, and you invaded their territory without permission or knowledge. We didn't know they existed before we crossed. That doesn't matter to them, Rodriguez said. Ignorance is no legal excuse. Entering someone's house without knowing someone is there is still invasion. But they are curious about you, fascinated. Humans are the first three-dimensional species in a long time to discover access to the substrate independently. How long? You don't have an adequate temporal unit. Perhaps millions of years. Perhaps billions. Time works differently in the substrate. Harrow leaned forward more. So we're special? Unique? No, Rodriguez answered without emotion. You're persistent, stubborn. Other species discovered access before. All retreated immediately when they encountered the inhabitants. All decided the substrate was forbidden, that they would stay confined to their native dimensions. You didn't retreat. You kept testing obsessively. You kept crossing even after the first incident. That makes you interesting. Because we need this technology to survive. They know, Rodriguez said with almost empathy. They felt the need, the desperation, the hunger for expansion. And that's why they offered an agreement. A mutually beneficial proposal. My stomach turned with premonition. What kind of agreement? Rodriguez smiled slightly. A not completely human smile. Unlimited access. I don't understand. You want to travel faster than light, cross the galaxy freely, reach all the stars, colonize 1,000 worlds. The inhabitants will allow this freely. They'll even help, facilitating the passages. But there's a price. What's the price? Permanent symbiosis, he said simply. Every time you use the warp, you'll take the dimensional seeds with you. Small fragments of the inhabitants. That will grow where you go. And spread. Where humans go in the universe, the inhabitants will also go. permanent partners, eternal symbionts. That's an invasion, I said. It's a mutualistic partnership, Rodriguez corrected calmly. Humans gain the galaxy and dimensional knowledge. The inhabitants gain physical access to three-dimensional space they can't reach alone. Everyone benefits. Win-win. And if we refuse? Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but the air in the room suddenly became heavier, denser, as if the pressure had dramatically increased. Some present began to breathe with difficulty. Then you stay permanently confined here, he said. Only in the solar system. An infinitesimal point in an infinite galaxy. And every time you try to use the warp, the inhabitants will resist. Actively, violently if necessary. Is that a threat? It's a frontier being established, Rodriguez responded. Its territory being demarcated. A universal concept that transcends culture and biology. They were in the substrate first, long before humanity existed. Before Earth existed. The substrate is theirs by temporal right. You only have access with their permission. Harrow considered for long, silent minutes. How much time do we have to decide? You already decided, Rodriguez said with finality. The moment you built the first FTL engine, the moment you activated it, the moment you sent us through the substrate, you already crossed the irreversible line. Now you only choose consciously what you already chose unconsciously. Voluntary partners or resisted invaders. 2 months later, in the following 2 months, the situation deteriorated rapidly and catastrophically. More and more people were transforming every day. The quarantine wasn't containing anything. The growths were spreading through the station in patterns engineers couldn't explain. And worse, other space installations began reporting contamination. The International Station in low Earth orbit. The mining station on Mars. Tranquility Lunar Base. Even installations on Earth's surface began reporting cases of people developing the patterns and glowing eyes. How had it spread so fast? We discovered the answer after weeks of digital forensic investigation. It was the data. Every transmission about the FTL engine contained something hidden. Complex mathematical patterns embedded in the metadata. Information compressed in ways our algorithms didn't recognize. And when that information was read by human minds, when the patterns were processed by biological brains, it planted conceptual seeds. Ideas that grew. That spread to other minds. That eventually manifested physically. Not physically first, mentally first, making people dream of impossible angles, making them see patterns in the corners of their vision, and eventually making them become the angles, become the bridges, become the anchors for the inhabitants. Earth panicked when it realized the scale. The 6 megablocks that normally could barely agree united for the first time in 50 years. They formed an emergency global government with extraordinary powers. The single directive contained the transformation by any means necessary. First, they tried global quarantine of all known cases, identify all the transformed and isolate them. It didn't work. It was too widespread. For every identified case, there were 10 undetected. Then they tried extreme measures, extermination, special forces hunting and eliminating the transformed without trial. But the transformed didn't die easily. Their bodies had been optimized. And those they managed to kill smiled while dying. As if individual death didn't matter. As if they were just disposable nodes in a larger and immortal network. Then they tried to destroy all FTL research globally. Hunt down every copy of the plans. Burn every server. Eliminate every scientist who knew too much. But it was already spread across all continents. Thousands of scientists in dozens of countries had copies. And many had shared with colleagues, students, online enthusiasts. And finally, when all other options had failed, they tried to negotiate. They brought Rodriguez, still the most articulate, transformed, and who seemed most human, to the UN Assembly in New York. It was broadcast live to the entire planet. Billions watching. "Do you speak for the inhabitants?" the Secretary General asked, formally and carefully. "I am one voice among many," Rodriguez responded. "As all the transformed are voices. We are branches of the same ancient tree, fingers of the same dimensional hand, drops of the same conscious ocean. And their ultimatum remains unchanged: symbiosis or confinement." "It's not a coercive ultimatum," Rodriguez corrected. "It's simply physical reality. You can't use the warp without crossing the substrate. You can't cross the substrate without encountering the inhabitants. You can't encounter the inhabitants without changing. It's cause and effect. It's simple physics. It's inevitability. So we're trapped forever in the solar system, unless you accept the change, unless you embrace the transformation, unless you become more." "What if we develop a different FTL engine?" someone from the Chinese delegation asked. "That doesn't cross the substrate?" Rodriguez laughed. It didn't sound cruel. It sounded condescending, patient, like an adult explaining basic concepts to a child. "Do you have any idea how much of the observable universe is dimensional substrate?" he asked rhetorically. "You only perceive 3 spatial dimensions. There are 11 total spatial dimensions according to string theory, which is essentially correct. The substrate is everything between the layers. All the invisible structure, 99% of universal geometry. There is no possible way to go faster than light without crossing the substrate. It's mathematically impossible. It's like trying to swim without touching water. It's like trying to fly without entering the atmosphere." There was long and heavy silence in the assembly while everyone processed the implications. "How much time do we have?" someone asked with a small and defeated voice. Until the inhabitants force the issue?" "They already forced it," Rodriguez said gently, almost with pity. "Every person on this planet has already been exposed to the conceptual seeds, in the data they read, in the transmissions they watched, in the conversations they had. It's just a matter of time until the seeds germinate in every mind. Months for some, years for others, but it's inevitable for everyone. So we've already lost. Humanity is over." "Lost?" Rodriguez tilted his head curiously. "Or evolved into something greater." The transmission ended there, cut by the authorities. But everyone in the world had already seen, everyone had heard, and people began choosing their own paths. Some chose to resist until the end. They formed fortified enclaves, isolated, without electronic technology, trying to live like ancestors before the digital age, before the FTL engine. But it was impossible. The contamination was in everything, in the air, in the water, in the very ideas they tried not to think. Others chose to accept proactively, embrace the transformation as inevitable, accelerate the process voluntarily. They gathered in transformation centers established globally, where doctors, many already partially transformed, helped with the transition, making it less scary, less lonely. The vast majority stayed hesitant in the middle, waiting, watching, seeing which side would eventually win. But there weren't really opposing sides, just different speeds of accepting the inevitable. Just time. Present. 3 days ago, I resisted for 6 full months, working obsessively on a cure that never came, a reversal that always failed, a containment that always leaked. Everything failed, and then I started to feel it. First came the dreams that woke me screaming, falling through layers of reality that unfolded, seeing angles that made my eyes bleed even while sleeping. Then came the patterns on the skin, fractal lines appearing like tattoos nobody applied. They started on the wrists, then climbed up the arms in mathematical patterns, impossible geometry engraved on living flesh. And today, the fissures started. The skin isn't just marked, it's opening, cracking along the geometric lines. And when I look inside the fissures with horror and fascination, I don't see red muscle. I don't see white bone. I see pure angles, naked dimensions, spaces that shouldn't fit inside a human body. And I can feel something on the other side of the fissures, touching, pulling, calling. The inhabitants want to enter completely now. And part of me, the part that's rapidly changing, wants to let them in. 3 months after complete transformation, when I finally stopped resisting, when I accepted the inevitable, the transformation accelerated dramatically. Tanaka visited me when I was still in the initial stage. She was also transforming, slower than me, but it was inevitable for her too. "It's not what we thought," she said calmly, sitting beside my hospital bed. "It's not domination, it's communion, it's integration, it's true symbiosis." "You're accepting this?" I asked incredulously. "Accepting or not accepting doesn't change the outcome," she responded pragmatically. "So I decided to understand instead of fear. And Marcus, it's genuinely fascinating. I can feel things I never imagined were real. The extra dimensions, the impossible mathematics now makes perfect intuitive sense. It's like having new senses that always existed but were dormant. As if I was deaf before and now I hear impossible music, or blind and now I see colors without names. But we're no longer purely human." "We are," she insisted. "Just more. Humanity plus. Expanded humanity. The next step." I wanted to argue. I wanted to resist. But part of me, growing and dominant, completely agreed. The complete transformation took 3 months. And it was indescribable. It wasn't physically painful, but it was mentally profound. As if every cell was being rewritten, optimized, integrated into something greater. And when it ended, now, the fissures in my skin closed. The fractal patterns remain permanently, but they don't hurt. And my eyes, I know, glow with that blue-green light. Like Rodriguez's eyes. Like the eyes of all the transformed. But I'm no longer just Marcus Webb. I am Marcus Webb plus something much greater. Something dimensional. Something that lives in the angles between angles. And now I understand everything perfectly. The inhabitants weren't malicious invaders. They were dimensional symbionts, existing in layers of reality that three-dimensional life couldn't access or perceive. But when humans discovered access to the substrate, we created an involuntary bridge. And through that bridge, symbiosis became not just possible but inevitable. It wasn't violently forced, but it was mathematically inevitable. And humanity collectively chose. Even those who desperately resisted eventually all chose. Because once you know there are 11 dimensions, living in just 3 seems claustrophobic. Some still resist stubbornly, living in increasingly smaller enclaves, trying to preserve pure, original humanity. But they're fewer and fewer each year. Most transformed voluntarily, and discovered it wasn't the end of humanity. It was the beginning of something greater. Because with transformation came true unlimited access to the stars. Warp drives now function perfectly without resistance, without accidents. Because we're not crossing hostile territory, we're crossing territory shared with our partners. Human ships now fly between star systems in hours instead of decades. Colonies are being established on hundreds of worlds simultaneously. And where we go, we voluntarily take the inhabitants, not as parasites, as symbiotic partners. And we discovered something even more surprising. We're not the first or only. Other species made the same choice over millions of years, scattered across the galaxy, all integrated with the inhabitants in unique forms adapted to their biologies. There is a true galactic civilization. There always has been. It just wasn't visible to primitive species confined to 3 dimensions. But now we're part of it. And looking back honestly at what we were, limited, isolated, trapped in narrow dimensions, I can't regret the transformation. Because what we lost in original purity, we gained in expanded infinity. 10 years later. I'm writing this as a final record. For the last non-transformed, the final resistors, so they understand. We're not extinct, we're expanded. We didn't lose essential humanity. We evolved beyond it, and the choice is still available. It always will be. But how long can you endure 3 dimensions when you know there are 11? How long can you endure loneliness when you can be part of a galactic consciousness? How long can you endure being just human when you can be infinitely more? The answer is different for each person. But eventually, almost everyone chooses to expand. Because in the end, it's not about losing what we are. It's about discovering what we can become. And the stars are waiting. Not just for original humanity, but for humanity plus, for us, the integrated, the expanded, the evolved. And if you're reading this now and feeling that familiar itch in the back of your mind, that glimpse of angles that shouldn't exist, that recurring dream of falling through layers of reality, don't fight it. It's just the inevitable transition. It's just the natural change. It's just the next step in the cosmic journey that began when we first looked at the night sky and asked, what exists beyond? And now we know the answer. Everything. Absolutely everything. Just in more dimensions than we could see before. Welcome. Welcome to the dimensional substrate. Welcome to eternal symbiosis. Welcome to what inevitably comes next.